Hi, and welcome back to the channel. Today I want to talk about the beer that we made in Mule in the video prior, where you can make your own beer in Seoul. So this is the beer. You got a little glimpse of it last time. My last liter, like I said. So this is a golden ale. Now, what does that mean? What is a golden ale? So golden ales were invented in the 1980s, kind of late 80s, early 90s, by craft breweries, which were just kind of starting out, right? That's when the movement started to get traction in the USA. So this beer is essentially a bridge for consumers that had been so heavily influenced by pale lagers for decades, right? And there's nothing wrong with a lager. They're easy to drink, they're nice and clean, they're great. So this is kind of a bridge to flavors and textures and experiences that are a little bit more challenging without going too nuts. So this would have bridged that, you know, some guy who's been drinking lager all his life, have one of these. It's a little bit, you know, a little bump in bitterness, a little bump in this, a little bump in that. A nice introduction to the craft world. Recently, I did some research on golden ales. These have really been falling out of favor. And that's because they were a bridge to the craft world, well, 30, 40 years ago, right? This brand or style of beer is not really needed anymore with the way that the craft movement has taken off. So a lot of breweries aren't making it. They're just replacing this essentially with a pale ale at this point, which ups the hoppiness a bit, but that doesn't scare people anymore. So this style of beer is really out of fashion and it's not that easy to find from breweries. Flavor-wise, these can be characterized as kind of mid-hoppy, mid-malty. And again, a lager back 30, 40, 50 years ago would have been, well, really low malty and low hoppy. They're very crisp, they're very refreshing. So my mission today is to kind of review and compare and contrast mine with a macro beer, which is Kona Island, which isn't really a huge brewery, but they're American and they ship to Korea. They make enough of it. They're making enough to export it to Asia. So we'll consider that a macro brew today. And then a micro brew. A craft brewery here in Korea. It's Playground, which I love. Their beers are really good. And so we'll work our way through the beers. We'll taste all of them. I'll talk about how they taste. And then I'll kind of talk about the differences between all of them. So, here's the Big Wave Golden Ale. Gee, Big Wave, why do they call it that? It's Hawaiian beer, right? So, of course, there's a surfing aspect to it. That's why they named it that. And let's talk about what this beer is. They actually have quite a lot of info on it. So, this is a 21 IBU beer, which is, again, as an introduction to someone who doesn't really have experience with hoppy and bitter beers, that's pretty decent introduction. 21's nice. It's 4.4%. Again, not too strong, so not that offensive to people who are used to lagers, maybe something a little easier to drink. Citric Galaxy hops, and they use quite simple malts. There's a caramel 20 and a pale 2-row premium malt. So kind of basic barley malt there. So let's get a pour. I'm going to slow-mo it. So interestingly enough, this beer here, the Kona Golden Big Wave, so this is actually the beer. This is why I picked a golden ale for our recipe, for the one that we made in Seoul. This is not by any standard one of my favorite beers of all time, but I wanted us to make something that was fairly straightforward. Not too offensive, easy to drink. I didn't want to make like a double imperial stout for like my first beer that I'm gonna make. Let's take a sip. Yeah, it very much is like half lager, half ale. It's clean, it's refreshing. Okay, yeah, there's a little bit of caramel on the end there that comes through, right in the middle of your tongue. So it's a bit malty. There's a tiny bit of bitterness. There's a little bit of citrusiness in there from the hops. But again, someone who doesn't really adventure into beer, you could give them this, and they're not going to be like, oh, craft beer, that's for, insert pejorative here, but this is something you can bring to a barbecue and people will grab and drink and not go, oh, who brought this shit? Very drinkable, but you can tell by the color too, it's a little more dark than a lager would be. It certainly isn't yellow. It's golden, hence the name, right? All right, so we went from the macro brew, kind of mass-produced, still good, but mass-produced Hawaiian one. Now we have a local one that I did not make. So this is Playground's Hawaiian shirt GoldenAle, and they've actually teamed up with Brewing, which I'm actually not familiar with, but they teamed up with them to make this. This one's pretty interesting. This is 4.5%, which is very close to the Kona. But the IBU on this is 9. So this is like really low in the bitterness department. So I'm kind of excited. I've had this before, but I didn't critically analyze it. So I'm interested to have this again. And this has kind of a lighter malt profile to it, and a tropical yeast, they say, comes out in the drink. So again, let's pour this. Wow, you can see the reaction of this one when I poured it. A lot more head on there, and the color is much, it's a little darker, but you can see, like, you can't see through that. Oh, the hops come through a lot more, the smell. This is going to be a lot less crisp. Like the first one I said is much more balanced between a lager and an ale as far as drinkability goes. I have a feeling this is going to be much more ale-like, which goes into the microbrew, right? They're going to use higher quality ingredients. There's going to be a bit more depth of character, a bit more complexity here, so let's see what happens. They weren't kidding about the IBU of 9. It's not sweet either, but it certainly isn't bitter. Yeah, a little bit on the end. The texture of this one, the mouthfeel, is much less easy to drink. And I don't mean that as a bad thing. Just the thickness of it is a lot more. It lasts a lot longer in your mouth. Yeah, again, you can see the color of it is incomparable to the first one. Incomparable. I think if it's a hot day and you're having a barbecue, bring out a 12-pack of Kona, put it in the bucket full of ice outside, barbecue some stuff up. Everyone's going to be able to enjoy that. No one is going to be offended by the Kona. Even though the IBU is lower on this, it still has that grassy, hoppy, not bitterness, but that kind of tang, that funk of like fresh cut grass, which, you know, dads at a barbecue might like that smell when they're mowing the lawn. They might not want it in their beer. So this is the one I'm nervous about, obviously. I didn't make this, I can't claim that, but I was involved in making this. So I'm a little nervous. When we were bottling, you put sugar in when you're home brewing, and that sugar turns into CO2, and that carbonates the bottle. I don't have a CO2 pump. I don't have kegs. I can't artificially carbonate beer and store it in kegs. It doesn't work like that. So when John told me put 2 teaspoons of sugar in each of these, and he's like, be careful, and this is not to blame John, but he's like, be careful, because too much sugar, it'll blow up in the fridge and there'll be beer everywhere. So I was a little easier on the sugar. I went about 1.6, 1.7 teaspoons of sugar per bottle. And the carbonation is not quite where we wanted it. I've talked to Julian, I've talked to Bruno, I've talked to John about all our bottles. And carbonation seems to be the biggest key here that's lacking, which is my fault. But I was being overly cautious. Good sound. Yeah. Yeah. So the question is, how does the carbonation look? Now, it didn't form a whole lot of head on there, but you can see the bubbles inside. So, oh, this smells very malty. There's a sweetness to it. I've had a bunch of these. I've drank some of Julian's bottles. Yeah. This one is way maltier than the other two. Especially the Playground one. It's way maltier. There's like a definite caramel and like sugary malt that comes right through. It kind of goes away, and there's a bit of like an herbally, grassy bitterness afterwards, but it's not strong at all. The flavor's there, but the bitterness isn't that strong. We bottled a lot of these bottles. Some of them were hits and some of them weren't. The flavor between the different bottles was quite large, which is disheartening. You want consistency, right, with your product. Julian and I, in my next video, we went down to Sausan to a brewery, And the head brewer there, Nick, he drank one of Julian's bottles, and he said, I'd pay for this in a bar, which is just the most massive compliment you can get, right? Guy owns his own brewery, brews his beer. The beer is really good, too. You'll see next week. It's not terrible, but it does lack that mouthfeel that a beer, you know, you expect from a beer. You expect some carbonation. Yeah, it's watery. And with the maltiness and the sweetness that comes through, I had one of the little bottles and I brought it to work and we shared it with my co-teachers. It was much nicer, which again pains me because you would hope that the 16 bottles that we bottled would taste the same. Yeah. This just makes me want to brew more and really nail down that consistency and quality factor. I don't even want to be amazing. I just want a good beer that tastes the same in all the bottles that we make. That would be the mission. We'll see you next time with the video from Sausan Brewery with Nick. And cheers. We'll see you next time. Happy drinking, happy viewing. And again, I thank you for watching. I'm still new to this whole YouTube alcohol stuff, so if you're watching and you like my stuff and you watch all my videos, thank you so much. It means the world to me.